Welcome back to our last part of our today's session. We will have a panel on the question, do no harm or do good. How do we ensure good health in fragile contexts? What are the roles and requirements of health programs in mitigating fragility? So I would like to jump into the issue we already talked about today, and would like to invite Rachel Slater to tell us a little bit more now after having heard these discussions today here in the plenary, but also at the working group where you participated. How do we ensure, what can health systems do to mitigate fragility?
Okay, thank you very much. As I just said to the group that I was in a working group with, I slightly feel like I'm the imposter in this group, because I'm not a health expert or a health systems expert at all. I work on a large project that looks at how people make a living in fragile contexts and how they access services. And one of the things that we're particularly interested in is the impact of service delivery on fragility. Specifically the impact on state building, whether it's through building state capacity or by enhancing state legitimacy. And this leads me to say a number of things about the role of health systems and how they impact on fragility, some of which I fear may not be very popular. The first one, which hopefully gives you a bit of space as varied agencies working on delivering health in fragile situations, is that who provides services does matter for the quality of services. So services provided by non-state providers are regularly viewed as being better than services provided by the states in the countries that we work. And this is based on a longitudinal panel survey that has 2 waves that's taken place in northern Uganda, eastern DRC, Pakistan, Nepal and Sri Lanka. But what's really interesting here in terms of fragility is that who delivers services doesn't make a difference for how people view the government, their perceptions of the government. And I think that matters for us an awful lot. There's pressure on non-state providers, humanitarian agencies in particular, who provide services, particularly health services, to leave quickly post-conflict. There's an assumption that they're in the way, that they're crowding out the state, that they're preventing the state from building legitimacy with its people, that they're getting in the way. And what we actually find is that whether it's the state or non-state providers delivering services doesn't make a difference. So for me, I think we need a bit of a rethink about the speed and ways in which we withdraw, because it's not the case that we undermine state legitimacy or people's perceptions by sticking around. The second point that I want to make is about what really seems to matter. I get asked all the time by donor agencies, should we do security first? Is that the most important? Should we invest in health? Is it education that matters? And the answer that we always give to that is, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. So this is about, it's not whether you're delivering health, and it's not what kind of health you're delivering, it's whether you have a participatory process that people can be involved in around that program. It's whether there's some sort of accountability for what is delivered. And it's about whether there's, for example, a grievance mechanism, a way for people to raise problems or challenge the program. And that is what seems to matter across all sectors for how people view the state. And so if we want to take steps towards state legitimacy and reducing fragility and so on, it's about how we deliver our programs and not whether it's a health program versus an education program that's prioritized. And I guess just the final thing that I would say is one that I find very hard to figure out what to do with. And that's in the work that we've done when we've asked people about their access to services, including health. We've asked them about access, we've asked them about use, we've asked them about satisfaction. And what we found is that the negative experiences have a far bigger impact on how people view their government and how safe people feel than the positives. So one of the beautiful ways that one of our team in DRC expresses this is that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. It takes a really, really long time to build up positive perceptions of government, but they can be gone in an instant. And for me, that means perhaps a rethink of this debate that we had this morning about do no harm versus do good. Because from what we're finding, doing good doesn't have anything as like a positive impact as doing it badly has a negative impact. And so there's a lot of thinking to do about the quality of our program and how we prioritize progress versus mistakes. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. This was really a very important first input from your side. Thank you, Rachel. Tim, maybe you can react directly on this and from your perspective and tell us what do you think are the key points for health programs for mitigating fragility?
Thank you very much. I was thinking more about how can we develop health programs. This is what the focus of our work has been more on how can we rebuild them. So I think I'll talk about that, but with the assumption that if the health programs are better, people have more trust in the services. We started in Rebuild, which is a program funded by the British government to look at rebuilding of health systems in post-conflict states. And we work in Cambodia, where we take a very long lens perspective, Sierra Leone, northern Uganda, and we also work in Zimbabwe, where there has been crisis, as you know. We started looking at the aspects of the health system in terms of financing and human resources. And from the work that we've been doing, we see the real importance of the community as part of the health system. And what we're now coming towards the end of the first phase of this work, and the areas that are coming out very clearly for us in terms of what needs to be considered in rebuilding the health system is the importance of the community and understanding the impact of conflict or other forms of crisis on that community, in order to be able to decide what kind of services and how access to services can be improved, because otherwise we can't get those services to them. So, for example, in northern Uganda, a lot of the young people were taken as child soldiers, so there's a missing generation there of people who would normally support elder people as they get old. So that's something that would need to be taken into consideration. Another point, particularly where there's been conflict, is the loss of many men, and so you have a large number of female-headed households, sometimes disadvantaged in terms of their access to labour markets to earn, to pay for health services. So we need to look clearly at the profile of the community, which is going to be different according to the different kinds of conflict and disruption that's taken place, in order to think about what are the appropriate services, not just now, but later. The second thing that's important is looking at the institutions. And it's not just the organizations, but the rules, the relationships within the health systems. And what often happens, and this is what we were discussing in our group before the coffee break, is that you get this big influx of aid agencies coming in to deal with the crisis, which inevitably has an impact, for example, on the labour market, because they all need people to work for them. Salaries perhaps are raised, people may leave government, and then that eventually that group withdraws, that group of agencies withdraws. So you've got a big change in the labour market that needs to be monitored and strategies tailored to managing that labour market. A third area that, this also quite often crowds out the decision making. We had a little bit of discussion about this earlier today about the local institutions, the Ministry of Health, is left out of the decision making, and big decisions are made. Those actors who've helped make them withdraw, and the weak local institutions, the government, is left with the problem of taking the health service forward with having made those decisions. Examples of this might be the contracting out of health services. So at the beginning, there might be a lot of work done to parcel that out to agencies. In Cambodia, it took well over 10 years before the government was able to take that back into their own hands and control. Sierra Leone decided early on not to contract out, and so for various different reasons, but I think benefited from that by maintaining control. The third area I would mention is human resources. We've had a lot of talk about it, whether it's volunteers or paid workers. They are extremely important in terms of ensuring equitable access of health services. They will have often been very badly affected by conflict, possibly even targeted by conflict. So there's a big challenge of rebuilding them in the context of quite often this labour market having been changed as the result of the influx of external actors. And we've looked at the issues around motivation and incentives that come from that, but we also recognize, and I think this perhaps does link with your state building, is you need the rules and policies that are needed to manage human resources. We've looked very specifically at how you post and transfer staff, how you move them around, and the findings that we've got from 2 countries we worked in is nationally there's been very little change in policies, little or no change in policies, but the people implementing them more at the lower levels, district levels, particularly in Zimbabwe and northern Uganda, they have actually been they may not have stuck to all the rules, but they've actually used them quite intelligently, thinking that if we post people to this dangerous area, we'll lose them altogether, so we'll be flexible about the rules. So these are the areas that we've been looking at, and we would suggest are not the only ones, but they're important things to be considering as you come out of conflict. And that, I think, would, coming back to your original question, would help with the contributing to more stability in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Julie, maybe do you want to react directly on this? What you've heard now from those, from Rachel and Tim, from their side, from their also a scientific perspective on this issue. What is your experience in this? Does it match with experiences you have?
No, I thought both of those comments were excellent, and I was going to, because it's middle of the afternoon, see if I can wake everyone up with a little demonstration, because I have to say all morning I was fixated by your glasses on the table, because I really thought that it was an excellent visual of what fragility could or could not mean. And I must admit that I spent the morning feeling quite anxious that the glasses were going to fall over. And again, that gives some get a miniature experience of what it's like to often work in fragile settings, there is that unpredictability. There's a continual anxiety that things are going to get better or get worse. But I was really struck that you could have done two things to have made your little cups a lot more stable. And that is to actually have a really stable base for building your cups. And as I thought that, I thought, yes, and you know the stable base is the community. It really is about communities, and that has come up time and time again throughout this morning in terms of communities and the importance of them. And if you have a strong base with a community, then you can perhaps build higher and higher in a way that is less fragile, more predictable, etc. And so in answering the question about the role of health and fragility and health, I think I jotted down 3 points here. And interestingly, they came up in the scientific, so I'm rather pleased that they were backed up by science. I think the first is that if you focus on the communities, on community health, whether it be volunteers, extension workers, the community itself, you do it in a participatory manner, then you can get much greater ownership of what's happening. You're aiming for ownership, you get the cultural acceptance, etc. is there already, and you don't have the problems like we had with Ebola with messaging, because the messaging's already there. I mean, the communities know what to say, what to do, who to involve, who are influential and who aren't. So the ownership bit, and so I was really pleased to hear that from a scientific point of view, and if it's participatory and ownership-led, then that can really help with fragility. But we also know that can make a health system less fragile as well, so you get the dual thing. The second was that if you have a strong base there, then you potentially have, and this is what we discussed in our working group, the importance of, yes, you've got emergencies, yes, you've got development, but what you really need is that continual effort at keeping things strong, the before, during, and after, the horizontal, for want of a better word, where you are actually developing and building the system. And the one thing that is always there is the community. You know, the internationals fly in and out, the support comes in and out, but the community is there. So again, that gives you a really strong base there. And then the third point about community, and this is something that we're really working on right now, and as part of the Healthcare in Danger programme, is the community protection element of that. So if a community owns health services, they can help protect them from attack, from conflict, from other disruption. And that's obviously not the whole answer to this, but we do find that communities know when attacks are going to happen. They can then move things if needed. They can then help and protect it. But also just that sense of, these are our services, they're important. Don't attack them. Don't let them get eroded. And that's important for the continuity of healthcare itself, fragility. But I also think that when you see health services that are so often sacred and fundamental being eroded, you're eroding not just the services, but often the fabric of society as well. So again, if you can actually hold on to that and protect it, then you're probably helping the health services and you're helping that state of fragility. And then I added a final fourth one, and that is, if you make your cups out of plastic instead of glass, then you're less likely to have a problem, and perhaps you can go higher. And I say that as a little joke, but in fact, one issue that came up repeatedly today was about flexibility, fluidity, and obviously plastic is a little more flexible than glass is, and that's flexibility when it comes to donors, flexibility when it comes to programming, flexibility when it comes to mobility to keep up with populations, etc. But those are my little reflections, and I have to say your glass thing, it's really stuck with me. I think it's a great example of what fragility is and isn't, but also gives us some idea of how we can help tackle it.
Thank you very much. The inspiration for the glass things came from Bernadette, as I already told her. She wasn't talking about glasses, but we were talking about other things, and so the inspiration came to me. So you, Bernadette, you had a wonderful talk this morning, presentation about this community issue as a central as a really a central focal point for working and for a participatory way to include them, how it's important in building up health systems. Short comment from your side, not necessarily on plastic, but on what you've heard from Rachel, from Tim, and now from Julie.
I would go fully with what you have presented now. I think you need a good stable ground before you build up. But I also stress that you need to interconnect and to have the building up. That is something which, even if you are at the local level, you still need a referral and you need the higher level. So that's an issue which is very important. Looking from a community side, I think I really learned that there is no quick fix. So we can, if you work with community, it needs long time and it needs processes support and not a long-term perspective, and not just coming in and then leaving them again and maybe coming in a year later. So it needs continuity. I think it needs a very transparent, that is something what I learned, it needs a transparent approach where you include everybody. So if you talk about the community, it's community members, but it's also authorities, it's traditional authorities, it's state authorities. The more diverse you have the group on the table, the more likely you really have a good interaction with everybody. And I also think that that they are network in communities like the Red Cross, or a network which is not which could be a potential and is often not used actually.
Thank you, Bernadette. I would like to come to have a closer look now to the interface between humanitarian aid and development cooperation. Here is Andreas Huber coming into the debate, I think, with the experience and the knowledge behind of the humanitarian aid in this question. So when there was one thing in Bernadette's presentation this morning that was, she said, it's quite difficult or very challenging to change from a survival focus to a focus of developing a system. And I think this is certainly a challenge also for the humanitarian aid. So what do you think, Andreas Huber, what are for you the important points to follow in the interface between humanitarian aid and long-term programs?
Well, thank you, Martin. Actually, I like the construction, and okay, I'm missing the experiences from the whole day, so I'm coming in a bit new, but actually I had a question to you when I saw the free, not glasses, but plastic balls. Is it by coincidence it's free, or does it have a significance? Because you know, if you look at the base, then, and that brings me a bit to the question you have. I mean, the base is, you know, is communities, right? But it's also a state. It's also international community. So it's maybe just a coincidence that I see these free plastic balls in all that. But you don't have to respond now. But I just like the example because sometimes, you know, things happen like that, and I think it's a very valid point because it brings me to what you said. Of course, we have. You know, we always have to look that we don't focus only on one side. And if you talk about the nexus between humanitarian aid development, I've been working in both of them. It's definitely not where we're supposed to be, but I think we are progressing. So I think there is really some hope that things are going into the right direction. I can also give you some examples, and maybe this is not directly linked to the question, but for me, one of the absolutely necessary things are context first, context analysis. Context analysis, and I must say, maybe not looking back in the last 5 years, maybe looking back the last 20 years, in emergency were in many cases neglected. You know, I mean, you had to rush, you had an earthquake, you had tsunami, everybody had to be there, you had the cameras, you had the microphones, you had to show a result, you're spending some money. So there wasn't really much time to make this analysis. I think this is really changing also. It's also changing because the emergencies are not the same anymore as we used to have. But however, I think also today, if you look, and this instrument of context analyzing, it's an instrument which is also linking short-term and long-term activities. I'm not talking about humanitarian aid development and so on, because anyhow, I think in 20 years, these expressions might not existing anymore like that. Well, don't quote me. Huh? You promised me that you can take some quotes out of that. Anyhow, but local context, I think we also have to be careful that we are not just looking at the context where we're working at the place we're working at. We also have to look at the international context. And especially we also have to look at the Swiss context. And the Swiss context, and well, I don't know where you're coming from, but some of you are not from Switzerland. The Swiss context matters much more than it did maybe 10 years ago. Or maybe that's only my perception, but I have the perception the last 5 years it really changed a lot. So if you talk about Nexus humanitarian aid development, I think there is a third component in it, and that's politics. Politics matters much more. We see that in the recent discussion we have regarding our new batch 2017-2020, all the discussion in the parliament, talking about humanitarian aid, talking about development, but also, first of all, talking about migration. What do you do, you know, in order to tackle what is happening in front of our doors at the moment? So I think these, you know, it's a bit more complex than just humanitarian aid and development. However, to maybe to answer your question, I see a development within this question. Looking 10 years back, it was mostly continuum, as we said. You know, first was humanitarian aid, and then from humanitarian aid you had some rehabilitation, and then in some cases you had long-term development cooperation. I think in the last couple of years you observe much more, especially in light with the protracted crisis, you see the continuum overlapping. You see humanitarian aid staying, and you see development already starting, and this, you know, this creates this gray zone between those two. And of course, this gray zone, it needs new definition, it needs discussion, dialogue, and so on to come over it. And I think that's where we are at the moment. I think that the time when we had the typical only poverty reduction oriented program like we used to have 20, 30 years ago is a bit passing. So we're coming into new dimension with protracted crisis. And as I said, I mean, migration, we're just in the beginning, I'm pretty sure. From continuum to contiguum, also talking about SDC, I think we have some progress in certain areas. For instance, mentioning one program, the Horn program, Somalia, which covers Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. That's something where the two instruments work in a co-lead. It's quite interesting because the co-lead is, some of my colleagues can tell stories about it. It might be expensive, it might use a lot of personal resources, but it also brings together the best of each instrument. Two teams, two visions, two ideas. How can we progress? How can we tackle the south of Somalia? How can we tackle the food insecurity in Ethiopia? New crisis coming up. How can we tackle state building at the same time? New Deal. Okay, maybe a bit a buzzword, which is not as popular as it used to be a couple of years ago. But I mean, bringing together all these different views, and I think it's actually, I must say, it's really a good way to move forward with this cooling. It forces people working together. Sometimes it's good to do that, and it's really also, it's inspiring also, you know, visions and views and moving forward. I must say that we had in the past, we have even one division within SDC. They were working on both instruments. That's history. We don't have it anymore. I think it's, I'm regretting that, but that's the way it is at the moment. But I think that's probably even more the future, that the instruments are working much more closely together. So I hope I answered some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Andreas Huber.